Hello and welcome to the Road Monkey podcast. We are the show that each week shares a little bit of inspiration and insight to help you as you navigate your week, month and year. Today we are talking psychology and we are with one of the best in the world. Tom Bates is our guest today, and no introduction I can give him would do both his CV and who he is as a person true justice. So I'm going to let him introduce himself. All I will say is that Tom is one of the most incredible practitioners and people that I've been fortunate enough to get to know on my own sporting journey. And the one word I'd use to describe what is coming up over the next hour or so is belief. 100% and unequivocal belief. So here we go with episode 85 of the Road Monkey podcast, featuring world-leading performance psychologist Tom Bates. Hello, Tom, and welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm very well. Great to be with you, Kev.
No, great to have you with us. It's been a very long time coming because I think we've done about 10 versions of this podcast whilst driving around the UK every summer. So I feel like it's nice that we're finally actually getting the microphone switched on and recording some of it. So, I mean, I know you, but for our listeners and viewers out there, give us a little bit of an introduction. Who is Tom Bates? What does he do? Tell us more.
Wow, what a great start to the podcast. First of all, it is a pleasure to be with you in this format. We have been driving around the country and also running at each venue in the mornings to stay fit. So hopefully this is going to be a virtual jog around the local area. My name is Tom Bates. I'm a performance psychologist to the British Olympic swimming team, to Premier League soccer teams and Premier League rugby teams. I work a little bit in business as well as education, using the, I guess you could say, the science of performance psychology to help athletes, teams, coaches, and people get the very best from themselves.
Oh, well, that was very, very concise, and I've got about 10 different threads there I want to pull on, but let's time warp back to teenage Tom. How did this all start?
Wow, great question. I was a player for Cambridge United in the Youth Development Centre, and I wasn't good enough. I didn't make it. I had a dream of becoming a professional footballer, and that dream came to an end when I was about 15 or 16, and I was released from the youth development setup, but continued to stay in love with football. And while studying in PE one day, I was introduced to a video which was about sports psychology. It was Johnny Wilkinson kicking the winning drop goal for England in the infamous World Cup win. And there was an interview about how he was thinking and feeling and some of the processes that went into performing at his best in the arena when it mattered, under pressure. And that was very much about the way he trained to think and feel in those sort of situations. So I became fascinated by that because I just finished playing and I still was in love with football. Professional football has been really my background for the last 25 years. So I decided that I was going to go and study, and I searched all around the country for a course at different universities at the time that combined coaching with the science of sports psychology. And I found a course down in Bournemouth, which was a 4-year course with a 1-year placement. So sandwich course, 3rd year, go out into the industry after you've studied for the first 2 years. And essentially it was to apply the science of sports psychology alongside coaching practice. So I got into coaching and did all of my badges and became a UEFA A licensed coach and started coaching at the Centre of Excellence at AFC Bournemouth at the time. And that was at a time when nobody really knew what sports psychology was. So I landed a great job my placement year coaching in the Centre of Excellence alongside Eddie Howe, who was my centre manager then, who's, of course, now the manager of Premier League Newcastle United. And I was given the opportunity to really prove the worth of sports psychology with players, with teams and with coaches, because like I said, at the time, nobody really knew what it was. So they gave me a contract to work in the Centre of Excellence as a coach. And I tried to explain to them, no, but there's more to this. There's the sports psychology side of what I've been learning. And I think it could really make a difference And they said, well, we haven't got a budget for that, so you're going to have to do that for free. That's no problem. So they gave me an opportunity to do that for free. And it was a really, I guess you could say that was the birthplace of applying what I thought that I knew into the practical world of academy football at that time.
So, I mean, you mentioned Eddie already, but I think some early people that you've come across, whether that's the Johnny Wilkinson moment, I remember watching that kick. I still got the poster at home on my parents' wall of that 2003 World Cup team. And that was a key moment for me. Obviously, great opportunity there down at Bournemouth. But what were some of the experiences that you had relatively early on that have kind of shaped to where you've got to? And let's make sure it's balanced. Let's do some of the good stuff, but let's also explore some of the more challenging stuff.
Yeah, well, it was certainly and has been more challenging along the path because, like I said, so I moved from Cambridge, where I was from. I was offered an opportunity at AFC Bournemouth, but even that in itself, I remember writing letters as a undergraduate studying sports psychology and coaching sciences, and the cohort in year 3 go out to apply in what they think they know in industry. It turns out what I thought that I knew was very, very far from the reality of the practical environment in professional football. So, but to get that opportunity in itself was very, very difficult. I remember sitting down and because I had no contacts, I had no network back then. I was just a student who'd moved away from home with a passion and a dream to use sports psychology to improve elite performance. But there's a big gap between A, what was being theoretically studied, and B, practically applied in the real world environment. So the first hurdle I had to overcome is how do I gain an opportunity to get access to prove what I think that I know? So I wrote lots of different letters, 182 letters, not emails, as it would be probably now today, but typed out, printed off, delicately put into envelopes and posted off to managers and coaches and directors of clubs up and down the country in the Premier League, all the way through down to non-league and in the States and even into Europe. And one by one, these letters came back saying, thanks very much for the application, but we don't have anything on file at the minute. There's nothing that we can provide you with. And I remember this, I was 2 weeks to go before I had to decide, what it was that I was going to do if it wasn't going to be practicing sports psychology. And sometimes letters would come back and say, no, thanks very much. Sometimes nothing at all, until one day, 2 weeks before the deadline. I remember it like yesterday. A letter come through the door from my local club, which was AFC Bournemouth at the time, studying down in Bournemouth. A guy called Joe Roach, who's an incredible guy, head of youth then, came from military background actually. But he wrote me a letter and said, there's nothing that we have available at the minute, but if you'd like to call this number, then we can discuss, I can give you some advice to see, where you could go in the future. The very next day, I decided that instead of just calling this number, I was just going to go down to the stadium, down to Dean Court. It was once fondly known. And I remember, it was a defining moment for me in very real terms, because I hadn't moved away from Cambridge. I just decided I wasn't going to move away all these miles and study for this many years to let that dream, that passion just slip by the wayside. I had friends that had told me they tried everything they could. They had to settle on being a lifeguard for the season, which was not what they really wanted to do, but they had to earn some money because we weren't particularly wealthy as students. We were living on budget. So I went to the charity shop and I bought a red tie, which was the color of AFC Bournemouth. I borrowed my friend's briefcase, and my shoes weren't particularly smart at the time. So I borrowed some shoes from another friend and I got my best shirt and rocked up to the stadium unannounced. And I remember it literally was like this. I went to the stadium and went through the reception doors, and it was so funny because there were two little voices that popped up on either shoulder. And one said, "What are you doing? Nobody knows you here. You haven't even got an appointment." The guy said, "Just give him a call." He didn't say, "Come and see him." And then the other voice said, "Go for it. Go for it. If you don't make it happen now, it's not going to happen. No one's going to do it for you. You didn't come away from, so it was a battle just going through in my own mind, going through the doors at reception. And I walked up into the reception, and the reception lady looked at me, dressed as smart as I possibly could be. And I said, "Hi, I'm here to see Mr. Joe Roach, head of youth. My name is Tom Bates." And she looked at me and saw the briefcase and looked at the schedule, and she said, "Oh, hi, Tom. I'm terribly sorry, but we don't have an appointment for you here. There's nothing in the schedule." I said, no, that's okay. I just said, I just want to see Joe for 5 minutes, just 5 minutes. And I didn't even know he was there at this time. Fast forward, she says, okay, sir, no problem. Teas and coffees are over there. I'll just go upstairs to see Joe to see if he has any availability. 10 minutes go past. I'm sitting there drinking my tea thinking, what am I doing? Nothing's in the briefcase. I don't even own these shoes I'm wearing. And then Joe Roach, who's a Liverpudlian, he's a Scouser, a great guy, comes walking down the stairs with a clipboard and lots of paperwork. He says, "Tom, I've got 2 minutes. If you want to come up, I've got 2 minutes. Can we do it? Can we go?" I said, "Yeah, Joe, absolutely. No problem at all. Let's go." Anyway, up in the office, 2 minutes lasted for half an hour. After half an hour and then training, we went for lunch. After lunch, we came back to the stadium, and I walked out of the stadium with a bag of kit, and he said, "I'll see you on Monday to start the placement." That was the reason I tell that story, is because I think I'm a great believer that each and every single one of us has a passion, an intuitive inner voice that says to us, what is it that you really are most interested by? What do you just dream of being and doing? And for me, that dream was helping athletes to perform at their best, because I truly believed and had experienced the power of improving my own mindset to achieve, to be more confident, to focus, to perform under pressure, to understand how to overcome the challenges, both as a coach, but also as a player. And I just wasn't prepared to be a lifeguard for the season. I just wasn't prepared to do that, because I think if it was going to be, then it was down to me. There's a lovely phrase: if it's meant to be, it's down to me. So the reason why I share that is because it was a challenge. I felt like I was an imposter. I didn't have a wealth of knowledge. I didn't have a doctorate behind me. I was a second-year undergraduate with no contacts in the game, and I was just passionate about making it happen. And sometimes we talk about challenge as if it's external, but key to that story is that it was an internal challenge for me. The reason I talk about the two voices is because one voice said, "Go for it, you can do this, you can achieve." The other voice said, "What are you doing? Turn around, no one knows you." So there's an internal battle, and I really think that that's symbolic for all of us, not just if you're an elite performer, but if you're a coach, if you're an athlete, if you are at school and you are preparing for a presentation that might get you that mark that you really need to get the grade you want, or if you're in a job interview, or if all of us at some level can relate to that type of internal challenge. And the truth is that even the best in the world, we think that the Olympic champions get to the top in the absence of fear or doubt or worry or stress or strain. It's not true. Each of us have that internal battle, those two different voices. And the key is that achievement, success is really driven largely by choosing which voice we listen to, and then what we do off of the back of it. But it's certainly been a challenge, and is an ongoing challenge every day.
So one of the things that I think we've spoke about it when we've done our morning runs is this kind of life and death stuff. We have some quite deep conversations. And my thought when you were just saying what you were talking about there is that in life and death situations, people seem to be able to find like a 1% or the glimmer of hope or the possibility they can make it work. And what you're talking about there is almost applying that to just day-to-day life and actually going, well, yeah, it might be difficult. Yeah, it might be challenging. Yeah, there might be a tiny chance that out of those 180 plus letters I'm sending out, only one might be an opportunity. But if one's there, I'm going to take it and I'm going to find it. So I think there's a really interesting thing at play there. And I don't know if that's a sports thing where people who work or live or experience in sport have that kind of mindset of finding a way that no matter what the odds are. But I just find that a really interesting dynamic.
Wow, that's a separate podcast in itself. That's just, and the reason I say that is because everybody's familiar with the placebo effect in medicine. A sugar pill with no pharmacology whatsoever has the power to heal a sample of patients because of the belief, the conviction of the belief that the patient has in the medicine. So if you take two separate groups, one group who receives the sugar pill and another group who receives the actual medicine, sometimes the group who receive the sugar pill get better as fast, if not faster, than the patients who take the actual medicine. So we know for sure that the conviction of a belief has profound capacities to change the neurology, the physiology, the musculoskeletal system, the hormonal system. And this is not wishy-washy. This is actual hard-rooted science. And so if we take that concept, everybody's familiar with the power of belief and how belief can affect us in our lives. But there is the flip side of that coin. There is something called the nocebo effect. And this is the type of belief that, for example, I have friends of mine who get a sniffle on a Monday, and they may say, some guys go, well, that's just hay fever. I'll be fine. And others say, no, that's got a sniffle. That's definitely flu. I'm telling you, it's just a sniffle today. But by Wednesday, come Friday, I'm telling you, it's going to be on my lungs and I'll have the flu. Sure enough, they convince themselves based on no evidence whatsoever, other than this repetitive nature of a negative belief, affirming that belief to them. And sure enough, they're under the weather, they get worse. Now, I think there's a clear distinction to be made, right? Because we're talking about the extreme of that is life and death scenarios. But I also know of many, many studies, one in particular where a young lady in America, California, she's diagnosed by the doctors to have terminal breast cancer. And they say, you've got 3 months to live. We advise you to go home, get your affairs in order. It's not good news. And she says, thank you very much for your diagnosis, but I choose not to believe you. So she goes home. She gets all of the films that she absolutely loves, that just make her laugh. She spends time in the garden, something that she wasn't doing enough, because that's what she loves to do that. She spends time with her friends. She goes to visit the places in the world that she's never been to before. So she quits her job and just spends time doing the things that she absolutely loves. She goes back to the doctors 1 month later, because it's a check-in. They've got to monitor things and, arrange care. They run the tests, they look at the tests, and the cancer has decreased 85% in 1 month. And I think that two things about that. Number one, she's very explicit about the fact that she did not accept the diagnosis from the doctors. First of all, I think science in general has to catch up with this. We're only just beginning to scratch the surface of the power of surrounding ourselves with positive energy, of places that we love to go, people that we love, people that just bring us up, things to do in our lives that just bring us up. And she has a great phrase. She says that doctors and surgeons, physicians, should never say you are terminally ill. What they should say is, my knowledge and experience to treat you has terminated. There's a big, big difference in that. I'm a huge fan of that. Now, I'm not for 1 minute suggesting that there weren't other aspects to her recovery. And she lived, by the way. She lived. But it fundamentally started with a deep conviction that she could recover. She could heal herself. That survival was possible. Life is possible. And that's a wonderful story from, I think, one of the extremes of what we're speaking about here in terms of the influence that beliefs can have in our lives.
Well, for people absolutely captivated by that, myself included, there is a chance to hear you speak about belief, I believe, very soon, which I will link in the notes below this episode. So we might talk about that a little bit later on, but I know that you're running a session on belief, and that's something I find absolutely fascinating, and this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy where you watch people like Michael Jordan or people like that operate at the real extreme end of performance success. And he will talk about, and certainly in Game 6, the last 6th season for him, but his last season playing, when he's having a run at the title, he said, I am finding a way to win. I'm willing the team to win. I'm doing everything in my power to find a way somewhere, somehow. But it's that mindset of, I will make it work. And a positive mindset, not allowing the one on your shoulder there to start having a loud voice, actually going, no, I'm only listening to this one. I will make it work. On your journey, specifically, you must have had more moments like that since, because I'm pretty sure you wouldn't have got that job at Bournemouth and then go, well, that's me done. Everything else is just going to unfold ahead of me. The road is good.
Yeah, in fact, if we go all the way back to Bournemouth, there's a wonderful experience. One of my first youth players that I worked with was a guy called Sam Vokes, who is a centre forward. For anybody out there that doesn't know, he's an international striker, played in the Premier League for many years now. But we started to work together at AFC Bournemouth, and he had an opportunity to play for the first team, and it was his debut. He was 17 years of age. And before he played in that debut, which we won 1-0, he scored in the game. He was nervous in a positive way. That's the other thing about this. Nerves can be something very necessary. Stress can be helpful towards success. It's before he got to that moment, I asked him to write down a phrase that was true for him at that point in his career. So here we have a 17-year-old youth player who's just about to get his debut playing in the senior team in the league for AFC Bournemouth at that time. We're in League 2. So he's nervous. It's a great opportunity, but it's his first time, and he hasn't had much time with the first team training. So he wrote out a phrase, and the phrase goes like this. Remember, the task is I'm asking him to write something down that is true for him. And the phrase that he came up with was anything is possible when I truly believe in myself. Anything is possible when I truly believe in myself. He wrote that phrase down on a piece of paper and asked him to put it up on his bedside cabinet, read it to himself 3 times before he goes to sleep at night. So it's the last thing that he sees in the night and the first thing he sees in the morning. 3 times at night, 3 times first thing in the morning. Last thing he sees at night, first thing he sees in the morning. He says, Tom, as I'm doing this exercise, I'm starting to see myself scoring goals from all different sorts of angles, but I'm doing it in a Manchester United shirt for some reason. Headed goals, volleyed goals, tap-in goals, penalties, all sorts of great goals. And when I tell this story, people say to me, but Sam Vokes never played for Manchester United, so what's the point of the story? Of course, that's not the point, that he didn't play for Manchester United. What was happening was he was focusing on something that was true for him, that it's possible, that he can achieve what he sets out to achieve, because he is aligning his intention with that which he is capable of creating in his performance. He's aligning his intentions, attuning his attention to what's possible to create in his performance. He scored in that game. In that game, there was the under-21s Welsh recruitment national side. They were watching. He got recruited to the Wales under-21s from that performance. Later on, the next season, he got bought by Wolverhampton Wanderers for £250,000 in the Championship. They got promoted to the Premier League, and after that, he played in the Premier League and played at the European Championships. About 9 months ago, he sent me a picture of this old brown A4 piece of paper in a glass frame on his mansion, because he's a millionaire now after playing for teams in the Premier League. He says, still using it. Anything's possible, Tom. And I think that's a really wonderful story, because the first step is believing that it's possible, that it's just possible. Even if it's just 1%, I'm going to give my attention to that. And the first step is to believe that it's possible. Because if it's possible for Sam at 17, then it's possible for other 17-year-olds. But the key part of that is he channeled his energy and attention to something that was in his control to create and achieve in his performance, in his life. He believed that it was possible. It was possible. I'm just going to take the first step. Martin Luther King famously once said, you don't have to see the whole staircase. Just take the first step. You don't have to see all of the steps all the way down the journey for the next 5 years. Just take the first step, the step that's in front of you, and take that step with as much confidence and belief and consciousness. Be present in that step. And all of a sudden, you're taking so many steps that you find yourself at the top of the stairway and you didn't even realize it. Take the first step.
So, on your sporting journey, you've obviously given us a few examples already. What's been a moment where you've seen this belief in action? And not that it's surprised you because you know the science behind it, but what's really hit you emotionally, where you've had in a moment, whether it's an Olympic Games or a major tournament or whatever sport it is you're working with, where there's a real emotional connection with seeing the process unfold, good or bad, but actually you've kind of really felt that in here.
Belief in action in professional sport, defining moments. Good question. Great question, Kev. There have been so many. Good or bad? Well, I'll try and search. I'll give you two. The thing about belief is that when all the technical, tactical, physical preparation is done, and athletes enter game day or race day, or they step in through the ropes into the ring, or they get down onto the track, or they get up onto the blocks before the race, whether it's the Olympic Games, whether it's the Premier League, whatever competition. And actually, it doesn't really matter what the level of competition is, because what we're trying to say here is that a fundamental defining aspect of a successful sporting athlete is the capacity to believe in themselves to produce that which they've worked to achieve. And a very good example of this is, I remember being on the team coach on the way to Wembley, and I was working for Aston Villa Football Club. We were entering into Wembley, and we played Fulham. We actually lost to Fulham in the playoff final, in the Championship playoff final. Fulham, of course, went on to be promoted to the Premier League. But there was a sense that day that we, instead of going out to express everything that we were as a team, we set up a tactical strategy to try to contain the opposition to a degree. So our focus was really on trying to stop the opposition as opposed to go on the attack and win the game. And I can completely understand that because there's a lot at stake. The mistake that we made, though, was that because winners hate to lose. That's the thing. Winners, all winners, they hate to lose. But what you find out is that at the top, winners aren't afraid of losing. They dare to lose to win. They're willing and prepared to take the risks to go to achieve that which they intend. And so fear of failure is one of the things that can hold a successful mindset back. In this case, we were trying to stop Fulham from imposing their game on us in a defensive mindset. And there were certain tactical things that we did that day that influenced the outcome of that game. So you could say that because we were defensively minded, we prevented ourselves from unleashing that attacking potential throughout the team. The creative players in the team didn't necessarily have the freedom to go about what it was that they were doing in order to achieve. So that's an example of how a mindset of a team can prevent success if we don't truly believe in what it is that we're doing. Because at a certain point, a team is going to have to dare to lose in order to win. So belief, again, is central. It's central to everything that we do. We know that if you get into a competition and you don't fully believe that it's possible for you, then inevitably you're going to prove yourself right. There's that wonderful phrase by Henry Ford, and it goes like this: whether you think that you can or you think that you can't, you'll be right. Whether you think that you can or you think that you can't, you'll be right. So if I'm walking into a competition or an exam or a job interview or a presentation, and I'm focusing on things that take my belief away, what other people might think of me, that's a big one. I remember going to America and giving a presentation maybe 20 years ago now. And I found out before I gave that 15-minute presentation that there were significant members of the audience from lots of different clubs: Arsenal, AC Milan, Champions League winning teams, coaches that had been around the block, twice my age, hugely experienced. And I became nervous. And I realized I was becoming nervous because I was focusing more on what the audience were going to think of me and not what I was about to say and whether it was true or not. So I asked myself the question: is what I'm saying true fundamentally? Have I experienced it? Do I believe in the content that I'm about to present? Yes. Do I think that it has worth to coaches? Yes. So focus my energy and attention more on that than the audience that I'm about to speak to. And of course, over the years, I've spoken on large scale audiences and small scale audiences and bigger stages and smaller stages now all around the world. And what I've figured out is the funny thing that after that presentation in America, I finished and they gave me a big round of applause, and this coach comes up and she says to me, "Wow, that was amazing. Do you have an email address that I can stay in touch with you? We'd love to invite you back over here to give us another presentation and work with our teams. That was just fantastic." And I felt amazing when she gave me that feedback. I was on top of the world. And then literally 5 minutes later, another coach came across and said to me, Tom, I really don't think that was a great presentation. You didn't go into enough detail on these things. I didn't really get enough on that. And I just want to tell you that it's pretty much a waste of my time for the last 15 minutes. I was so deflated. I thought to myself, my goodness, what am I going to do? I thought I was creating an impact. And on the plane home, I was reflecting. So here on one hand was a coach telling me how magnificent the presentation was. And then another coach in the same breath, 5 minutes apart, telling me how bad the presentation was. And I was thinking to myself, which one of those two people are telling the truth? Which one should I focus on? Which one do I believe? Where do I go with that? And I thought to myself, if I asked each and every member of that audience of 500 people, what did you think of my talk? I'd likely get 500 different responses. So that's an interesting thing, because what I was doing in that moment was giving my self-worth to the opinion of somebody else. I was feeling great or feeling bad based on somebody else's opinion of what it was that I did. So they're both imposters. They're both imposters. And the skill is the capacity to be open-minded enough to consider both sets of feedback and find my own truth. Because all too often, we can become distracted by the noise and outside influence of other people's opinion. So I would say to anybody out there, the reason why I tell the story is because something that we must practice. And by the way, belief is like a mental muscle. Just the same as you'd go into a gym, if you picked up a weight and you were doing some bench curls, or you're doing a bench press or some squats or whatever, if you did that on a Monday and then didn't go back until the following Monday, it's pretty unlikely that you'll see any results whatsoever, just like muscles, you have to work them to strengthen them, to improve them. If you don't use them, you lose them, as that famous phrase goes. So it's the same with mental muscles. Self-belief is like a mental muscle. You have to work it. And it matters what you focus on, because what you focus on, you feel. What you focus on, you get more of. I'm going to say that again. What you focus on, you feel. What you focus on, you get more of. Stan Vokes in the morning, when he's thinking about anything is possible, when I truly believe in myself, he's setting himself for the day. He's setting himself up for the day, should I say. He's feeling good. He's waking up feeling good about training, about stepping into the day, about being the very best that he can be, no matter what happens. And that's the other thing. It's not about not having setbacks, as we all know. Okay. Success, as it turns out, has a lot more to do with how we respond when life is tough than how we respond when everything is going our way. That's what grit is. Sustained effort in the face of setbacks. Sustained effort. Winston Churchill once said, success for me is going from failure to failure without losing enthusiasm. I love that. When there's no seemingly tangible physical evidence or proof scientifically that you should believe in what it is that you're about to do, be crazy enough. Be the one person. Be crazy enough to believe in the 1% chance that you've got. That's what Theodore Roosevelt said famously. The future belongs to those who believe in the beauty and power of their dreams. How true is that? I don't know a single statue that was erected to a critic. There's no statues in the world that you can find of somebody that said, I don't think it's possible. All of the great and extraordinary things that have been achieved by people in music, in business, in sport, art, work, life in general, around the world over history have been achieved by those who were crazy enough to believe in the beauty and power of their dreams. It really is that simple. Just make a choice. It starts with a choice. Is it possible? Yes. Great. And then, of course, you dig down into it and you say, well, is it enough just to believe in yourself? And the answer is no, it's not. Because you can't just sit at home and visualize on the sofa and eat, crisps all day. You've got to get out there and do something. We have to believe that it's possible. Take action, but not just any action. Action that's strategic. Got to figure out a plan, but not be deterred fundamentally by the noise and opinions of other people or setbacks along the path. And one of the great phrases that I've heard recently in an educational sphere is, let me get this right, don't prepare the road for the student. Prepare the student for the road. Don't prepare the road for the student. Prepare the student for the road. Well, I'm still a student in many ways. I'm a student of life. And instead of trying to make that path smooth, straight roads do not create skillful drivers. Straight roads do not create skillful drivers. It's the grit in the road. It's the bump in the road. That's where the learning's at. That's where the learning's at,
Okay. So I've got a story that you told me last summer, 2 summers ago. I'm losing all track of time. So end of year and a half, if you like, of pandemic restrictions on sport. Tokyo Olympics. You've had then 5 years as an athlete to prepare for that moment. Plenty of internal voices saying you've not been prepared properly, you've stretched yourself too far, you've done an extra year, you haven't had the recovery, you haven't had the usual training you get. The media aren't as positive as they usually are. Everyone's on a bit of a download at the moment. And you get all the way out there and you've got 60 seconds to get it right. Take us through perhaps one of the conversations you've had with athletes in that sphere specifically, because I think people can often think there is no hope. And I think in those situations, it's very easy to crumble when it almost feels like the whole world's expecting you to crumble. So what was your experience at the Tokyo Olympics?
Yeah, it was an experience like no other. Of course, we didn't have the crowd. The arena environment and atmosphere was very, very different. There were some protests outside the Olympic Village. The population of Japan, 75% at least, didn't want the games to go ahead. Great Britain were nicknamed the Plague Island. It's safe to say that we were escorted from security guards and from the holding camp to the coach, or from the coach to the Olympic Village. So there were restrictions in place that made it a very different experience to one that the athletes and coaches and support team would otherwise necessarily experience. So in many ways, we decided that the whole approach was led with the team to not let that be an excuse. There were a thousand different reasons why performance might not go the way that we wanted it to. But fundamentally, the phrase, what we focus on, we feel. Have we done the preparation required to compete? And there's that wonderful talk by Bill Furness with the athletes, and he asked the athletes, told a story really, but defined 3 simple types of Olympian. 3 types. The first type is a tourist, come to capture the environment, the publicity, the commercialism, get caught in the event. I'm a tourist. The second type is a participant. You're there to make up the numbers, to be involved, to try my best, but that might not necessarily mean winning, so I'll just do what I can and participate in the competition. And the third type is to be a competitor, to really put into practice everything that you've trained for, to be at your best, to give everything you've got, to come here to compete. And so that's quite a nice analogy, because we were walking around the village. You start to see that in action. You start to see, athletes scooting around on bikes and going up and down on cycles and taking selfies and all of that. I'm not necessarily saying that's a bad thing, but certainly not a physiologist, but not necessarily conducive to optimal performance 1 hour before, 2 hours before your race. So I think in the context of the Olympic Games, it was very important that even though it was different, even though there was potential distraction, even though there were measures in place that probably the measures that were in place in Tokyo was certainly different to any other Olympic Games in history. The fact that it was over 5 years, not 4, in itself had a completely different context to the Games. We had morning finals as opposed to evening finals. But there's a wonderful phrase in British swimming, it's anywhere, any place, any time. That whole idea of just being ready to be at my best whenever that's needed, whatever hour of the day, whatever venue, whatever context, being ready and prepared to go and perform at my best. So the conversation that I would have with the athletes in that scenario, if I've got 60 seconds with them, or to perform for that 60-second performance, would be very simple. Have you done the work necessary to prepare? And 100% of the athletes say to me, of course, Tom, absolutely. Of course I've done the work. I wouldn't be here. And they start to convince me about all the work that they've done. And so I would say to them, well, preparation has been ticked then. So there's a very solid substance to confidence, to self-belief. I can believe in myself because I know that I've done the work necessary. I've prepared and taken every measure. A lot of the times, Kev, guys say to me, Tom, you're always optimistic. Sometimes you're deluded. You're the deluded optimist. You just believe it's possible all the time. And I say, well, that's interesting, because that's not what I am. I'm very optimistic, but my optimism springs from a solid grounding in preparation. I can be at my best. I believe in myself because I've done everything necessary to earn the right to be at my best. So I can believe.
Okay. Now, I'm mindful of your time, Tom. I have 2 things left to ask you. And this is a little bit of a curveball, but I know you speak quite passionately about being a parent and what that means to you. So having been on this journey and analysing it to quite a lot of detail, I'm sure, over the years, how does becoming a parent change your view, not just on psychology, but through a psychologist's eyes, the way in which you approach your job and your path as a professional, but also as a parent?
Yeah, wonderful question. I think becoming a parent has certainly made me more considerate about seeing the world through the eyes of the people that I'm working with, to see the world through the eyes of my children instead of my own. And that's quite a simple but very important principle for me. It is as a coach, it is as a performance psychologist, it is as a father. That empathetic capacity to see the world through the eyes of the people that we love and are working with completely transforms everything, because we don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are a lot of the time, with subjective bias. We have our own experiences, our own thoughts, our own lens through which to view the world. In psychology, it's called metacognition. Meta meaning above, cognition meaning thought, to rise above our own thinking, to step outside of our own sphere of consciousness and see the world through the eyes of another. That's the skill that all of the great coaches, the great mentors, the great parents have and develop. And it takes practice, because we are so biased in the way that we cling to our belief systems so strongly. We've spent a lot of the time speaking about the power of belief. But when it comes to knowledge, for example, the best I can tell you is that I believe this to be so based on my current level of knowledge. And that means that there's space for me to continuously evolve and adapt and improve those beliefs based on new knowledge. And that's what life's about, to consistently be open to consider new perspectives. But fundamentally, in a fatherhood perspective, in a coach perspective, from my job that I have, to see the world through the eyes of another. That's a lesson I've learned as a father, and certainly being a parent has taught me that.
That's a beautiful answer, and thank you for sharing that. Now, I've got one more thing to ask you. Now, previously on interviews I've done, I used to ask about what would you say to your childhood self, but you had a lot of the, I guess, traits and tenacity, if you like, to get where you've got to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change it a little bit. If I'm a teenager, I like the idea of performance psychology. I love coaching, and I'm looking to move into that space. What advice would you give to that group of people as a collection, with the wisdom and the knowledge that you've acquired on your journey?
Number one, fundamentally, follow that voice. Follow the curiosity. Follow that intuitive. If it genuinely is of interest to you, and we're speaking about sports psychology now, but it could be coaching. It could be, anything. If you have a genuine passion, an inner voice, a curiosity, an instinctive knowing that this is something I'd like to learn more about, follow that. Follow that voice. Listen to that voice. Despite the noise, despite the naysayers, despite the people that say it's probably not possible, it's very difficult to do, you have to go through 10 years of academic training or whatever. Follow that curiosity. Get curious. Follow it up. Get to speak to the people that you have access to. Go and find a belief partner, someone that you can confide in, someone that you think might listen. And even if that person ends up trying to convince you otherwise, go and find somebody else. See if you can speak to a teacher, or do some research on your iPhone or the internet. There's always a way to find more out about a subject. So the first step is to follow that curiosity. That will be my first thing, because there's going to be a lot of people out there that oftentimes people want to tell you that you can't do something. I think this is from a wonderful film with Will Smith, The Pursuit of Happiness. Great film, wonderful film. He said there's a scene in the film where he's speaking to his son, and they're shooting hoops on a basketball court. And his son is saying to his dad, Will Smith, "Dad, I want to be a basketball player." And Will Smith says, with the best of intentions as a father, it's really difficult. Only about 1% make it in the game. Kids of your age up and down the country is really tough. You'll probably average out about 9th grade or whatever, and then you'll figure out that you can go on to pursue your studies and get really good and do well in maths. And the son walks off the basketball court dejected. And Will Smith, who plays the father, recognizes what he's done. He's killed that intuitive voice, that dream inside that child. So he walks over to his son and he says, "Don't let anyone tell you that you can't do something. Even me. People can't do it themselves. They want to tell you you can't do it. You got a dream? Follow it. Go get it. period. What a great speech. And I think, in essence, we can all use a little bit of that. You got a dream? Go get it. Full stop.
That was an absolutely stunning way to bring it all together. And just thinking back to that scene, certainly on my favourite films, that list has definitely got The Pursuit of Happiness at the top, along with Coach Carter, with some very inspirational words there. But Tom, well, we do talk for hours, usually behind the wheel of a car going up the M6, but it's been an absolute pleasure to share some time with you today. I know there's a lot of people who are going to want to hear more from you. We'll put the link to your awesome book in the notes underneath this, but we will also share your up-and-coming event, because I know a lot of people would love to hear you speak live as well. So just a huge thank you for sharing some time with us, and just really, really grateful for it.
Real pleasure, Kev. Thanks very much for the time.
A huge thank you for joining us today. You can connect with today's guest and all our Rogue Monkey podcast socials through the links below this episode. If you're involved in a business, we would also love for you to check out our collaboration with Richard Cheetham MBE, our episode 44 guest, the link to which is also in the show notes. Finally, just a quick reminder to subscribe to the podcast, however you're joining us today, and please do pass this episode on to at least one person you think would take inspiration from it. Have a great week, and thanks again for being part of the Rogue Monkey podcast community.